All right, we are live. So, hello, my name is Colin. Welcome to episode 2 of Roll by Roll's Tavern Talk, a show where we, the Roll by Roll gang, discuss various aspects of running a great D&D campaign based on our experiences with our current adventures in Emathan homebrewed campaign. So, joining me tonight is half of the rest of our current Roll by Roll crew. We have Barry, who plays Nightingale and Landis. Unfortunately, Egan, who plays Douglin and Lafferty, had a family commitment tonight and was unable to join us. So, with that, let's get right into the topic with a little setup to start. So, as I said, we always try and pull something from our last session that we can discuss. And so, here's a little setup. So, during our last uh, Adventures in Emathan session last Saturday, the party received a warning from Darrom, an NPC that had been hired to escort, or the party had been hired to escort him safely back to the Dragonfly airship for his departure back to Vargas. Darrom warned the party that he expected his half brother, Hulren, to arrange an attack on the party while they escorted him. The party put together a plan that would use some disguises and diversions to try to avoid the attack. It was an excellent plan, but Hulren's thugs attacked as soon as the party departed from the inn to the airship. So this didn't allow the party to execute their plan. So after the session, as I always kind of think through the sessions and what I could have done better, what went well. I started to wonder to myself if I had railroaded the party into the fight. I thought it over, and I kind of concluded that I had always planned the encounter to occur as soon as the party left the inn. So the party's plan was good, but it just didn't deal with the possibility of an immediate attack. So, Barry, what were your thoughts on that particular part of our night?
Well, to be honest, the moment we stepped outdoors and shortly after we were caught off guard and attacked by the first few thugs, I thought to myself, you know what, we didn't even consider the idea that they would attack us right away. Like I came up with we all came up with this great plan, and it was banking on them attacking us at the last minute. So we didn't feel like we got railroaded at all. So, you know, it was a good fight. We put up a good fight, but yeah, it was just some oversight of not realizing that, hey, they could either attack us out the door or at the end of the trail, and we chose poorly.
Banked on the end of the trail. Yeah, so with that little scenario in mind, and my thoughts around if I had railroaded the party, we decided tonight we're going to discuss railroads, sandboxes, and player agency. And I think a good place to start with this discussion is some definitions, just to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So, first thing is railroad or railroading. So, railroading is the a DMing or campaign style in which no matter what the player characters do, they will experience certain events according to the DM's plan because the DM is trying to create a specific outcome. So, generally speaking, railroading is considered bad as it removes player agency. A sandbox DMing style or campaign style is one in which the PCs are given complete control to decide what they want to do, where they want to go, and of course, how they want to do it. Um, the DM has no specific outcomes planned and just basically facilitates the outcomes of the PC's actions as they occur. So again, generally speaking, sandboxing is considered good because it gives the greatest player agency. And then just for clarity around player agency, so that is the player's ability to impact the story and the world through their gameplay. So basically, their actions impact the world, their actions impact the story. They change both with their actions. Railroading gives the least amount of player agency, sandboxing gives the greatest amount of player agency. So you want to kick us off there, Barry, with your thoughts around railroading, sandboxing, and player agency?
Yeah, definitely, man. I think we also need to put in a little bit of uh just explaining the difference between railroading and we had talked about it, how certain parts of the game will need a linear path.
Yeah,
If you're
we were talking about linear storylines or linear plot lines. Yeah,
exactly. If your parent or if your character needs to rescue the princess, there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end to that adventure. That is not railroading.
correct.
Railroading is the worst of the worst. A lot of DMs fall into it. You plan an adventure for your characters, and no matter what they do, you're making sure that they're going to get from point A to point B to point C, and so on and so forth. So that's a really it's a trap a lot of novice DMs and DMs with experience can fall into. And coming from reading a lot of modules, it's really easy to see how that is a trap DMs can fall into, because if you have only DM'd modules up until this point and you're sinking your toes into the open sandbox world kind of scenario, it's really easy to quickly draw your characters into your planned adventure and they can't deviate beyond that. But in moving farther into the sandbox, that's can be dangerous too to a DM who doesn't have the experience to handle that much creativity. Like, your players can go absolutely anywhere and do anything, and that can be overwhelming. And so a lot of unprepared DMs will quickly, fall back on a very strict path that they had planned for that night's session, right? So these are all tools that DMs have to learn to balance. Like, certain times you do need to railroad, and I know a lot of people are going to object to this, but there are certain times in a campaign or an adventure where a bit of railroading is necessary to get players back on track. And Colin, we had a similar, or we had a really great example of this when we were playing the Storm King's Thunder game, and we had this giant open sandbox world, and we have a very creative role-playing team at that time, and we had probably, a dozen different plot lines on the go, and we got lost as a group. We didn't know which one was the main plot and which one was the just something we created.
Yeah, and that is so both. So we talk about a linear storyline. So the extreme of a linear storyline is when you start railroading, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where you know what needs to happen. So the storyline says you're going to go A to B to C to D, or if it's there's some branching in there, you may have the option to go to A to C or whatever. But I mean, generally speaking, where a DM gets in trouble is when you start limiting when they can do the what and how they can do the what, right? So when you start to really control that, and with a linear storyline, there's different levels that the DM can. We'll use the term railroad for. There's different levels you can railroad. So at the worst level, we'll say, to use the analogy, at the 5,000 foot level, the DM decides, in order for them to achieve this, they have to talk to this specific person in this specific part of town by this specific time, and does everything possible to keep the characters just achieving those milestones, those plot points exactly like that. Now, you can, if you bump a linear storyline up to say the 25,000 foot level, now maybe the DM just decides, okay, they need to speak to someone that'll give them the hints. They've got to find some way to get to the other side of town, and and leave it very wide open. And then if you go to like the 50,000 foot level, which gets you're still within a linear, but maybe the DM just decides they can figure out who they need to talk to on their own, whatever method they decide to do, whenever they decide to do it, and then however they feel like, coming to the conclusion of who they need to go and see across town. You just leave it all wide open, right? Now, on the one extreme, you're really controlling, but then on the other side, there's no control whatsoever, where you've just sandboxed your linear storyline. But it's very easy in that scenario for the characters to get lost, and then when they're lost, they don't know what they need to do, who they need to talk to. The DM is just, if the actions that they make is reasonable, I will feed them a clue. But we don't know where we should go, who we should talk to, right?
Ben,
And then
I've been
on
there.
on that, yeah, and on that other end, on the rail, you're literally laying everything out in front of them, and that for a lot of people that can get boring.
Yeah.
um, but even in the extremes, there are groups that would prefer to be in those streams. I mean, that's one of the joys of Dungeons and Dragons 5e. You can play. There's no wrong way to play it. There are groups that like to be railroaded because they don't want to make decisions. They just want to kill things and collect treasure and just lead us to the next situation like that. And there's people on the other side where they're like, I just, today our characters decide to get up and go to the tavern, or instead we decide to get up and go hunting, or, and
Become
they're just
sheep
playing
farmers.
yeah, they just play some completely wide open game where the storyline doesn't really even matter. You can throw the occasional hook at them, see, like maybe the town market has a problem, and if they bite, great. If not, yeah, whatever, right?
So as the experienced DM in our group, there's probably certain things that a DM can do to help avoid falling into the railroad trap. And you kind of touched on a few of them. Don't have information tied to a specific character or place. That makes it so that that information can come to the player whenever it seems right for that information to come to them. It's really easy to say, oh, I want Nezerban the wizard to give them this spell component that they need to build the magic contraption to get past the gates of hell or wherever they're headed. But if you remove the person, then that information can come from, say, the old man they happen to rescue down a back alley. Completely a sandbox scenario that they happen to go down this alley and you throw in this random encounter. But it's just simple ways of to not almost cage your own creative ability as a DM by placing key information to specific locations and specific people. That really helps avoid that railroad scenario.
Yeah, well, and as a DM, one of the traps you can fall into is, to use your analogy, so you have in your mind what the characters need to do in order to achieve the next milestone, right? So, they apparently have to talk to this wizard, and he'll give them the piece that they need to destroy the door, or whatever it is. One of the mistakes I've seen DMs make is they have their idea of how this can be achieved, and they're not open to, uh, player groups come up with just amazing ways to achieve things that you never ever had thought about. There's just so many. Maybe instead they go and build the biggest bomb ever and put it in front of the door and flatten half the castle to get in there, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
if you're railroading, you won't allow that to happen. You're like, no, you'll find some way. Whereas if you need to be open to the fact that the characters or the players are going to come up with ways to do things that you just never thought of, and you may have as a DM to say, you know what, I need a couple of minutes to figure out how this is going to play out, because I hadn't thought about that. And if you've got a decent group, they should be like, yeah, cool, we'll go get a drink or
Yeah,
whatever, or give you a few minutes to get your thoughts together on, because I think a lot of DMs end up railroading because they 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 either they can't think fast enough on their feet, or they don't have enough confidence in what they come up with on the fly, right?
yeah,
And that'll come with experience, and if you just can't come up with anything, like I said, you just have to tell the group, you know what, I need a minute here to kind of collect my thoughts and figure out what might happen here, right?
for sure, for sure. One of the greatest tools that DMs don't realize they have is their player characters. Like as you said, the ideas that players will come up with to get through situations and scenarios. There doesn't have to be one way to do things.
No,
The
here's a really simple phrase as a DM. If the party backs you into a wall, here's a super simple phrase you can use. How do you guys see that playing out?
Yeah,
Because they have something in their head. They're thinking, well, if we do this, this will happen, and then we'll be able to do that or whatever. And it's the old, it's the bit of the old joke where the party goes, oh, I hope there's not a dozen trolls in there, and the DM goes, there are now.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Right? Like, just ask the party how they think that's going to play out if you're stuck, and that may spawn an idea for you,
Yep.
or that's really playing into player agency, right? Because you're now saying, you tell me how this, how would you really like to see this play out, and then you can mold it a little bit, and throw your own little bit of flavor on it, right?
So just so some of the new players out there understand the importance of player agency. Now we've given you the definition of what player agency is, but the core value in player agency is, if you want your table to be invested in the world that you've created, they need to know that they can affect it in long-term ways, that
Yeah,
their being
yeah.
there makes a difference. And that's why player agency is so important. When they can make the choices of helping the squire instead of killing him, without being pigeonholed that they have to kill him to get the information and things like this, they are now co-creating that world with the DM. And you will get players around your table who now are like, I've created a long-term friend NPC here because I had the agency to do that. Instead of killing him to get the information, I spent a bit of time finding out that he was only doing it for the money because he has a sick wife. Now the DM had to come up with all of this stuff because I kept asking questions, but now there's all of this layers and depth to the world that the player helped create, and now I'm invested in this because I helped create it. So that's why player agency is so important, and we keep tossing that term in here, is because if you want your table to be invested in the world you've created, they need to know they're affecting it in a way that matters and will be showing up later on down the game.
Yeah, you know putting the extremes aside, for most people, most players who come in to play Dungeons and Dragons, they want to feel like when they make decisions that things happen because of those decisions, right? It's they don't want to feel like, well, we're instead of trying to sneak past the guards at the gate, we go around to the back and try and sneak in through a window, and the DM goes, oh, well, there's a guard at the window. And they're like, okay, well, we try and climb up on the roof. Well, there's guards on the roof, because they don't want you to get into this place. They're not ready for you to be in that place. And very quickly, the party's like, well, doesn't matter what we try and do here. It's clearly the DM doesn't want us to get into that place, right?
Yeah.
Whereas as a DM, you need to be able to just go, okay, I don't know what's going to be in here, but sure, let's let's go figure it out, or like you said, I this one moment kind of what jumps in my head back Storm King's Thunder when instead of killing one of the goblins, you guys adopted it basically, right?
Group.
Group. And um he turned into such a great story piece.
Yeah.
Like there were so many funny moments that came out of this little goblin that
Yeah.
you guys had adopted, right? And so what if as a DM I'm like, I'm not ready, I don't know how to deal with a goblin in the group or whatever. So no, he runs away or tries to attack you or whatever. I'm just like, you guys want to try and adopt a goblin? Sure. Let's see where that goes. Right?
You raised a really good point. As a DM, it's okay to not be prepared for something. Your players are going to throw stuff that you're not prepared for. Just say, you know what? I wasn't ready for this, guys. Holy crap, that was a great idea. Give me a few moments to come up with some type of logistics for it, and then we'll carry on. As a player, I know I always have stuff I could be doing that has to sit there waiting for a slow moment for me to, go through my inventory and make sure I'm refreshed on that, review a spell I'm thinking about casting. So the players will always have something that they're waiting to get some downtime to do. So don't be afraid to make a pause in the game, a bathroom break, a snack break, or whatever, and use that to your advantage to get over that scenario or that situation that you weren't prepared for. It's going to happen in an open sandbox world, guaranteed.
Yeah, and and you talked about it early on, Barry, how, if you're a dungeon master who has used published adventures, and I laugh at you because you still call them modules. No one calls them modules anymore. but
Fair enough.
but published adventures. You're just showing your D&D age there.
Yeah.
And um they're very linear and can be very controlled, and depending on the particular adventure, they can get very linear, and with some branching or whatever. So if you're a DM that suddenly jumps into the homebrew arena where you're creating the storyline that everybody's interacting in, that can be quite intimidating because you don't really know what's next, right? And when you first jump into that, and I still use it now when we're getting to a very wide open part in our homebrew campaign, where I will just say, guys, what do you think you'll be doing next session, to help me prepare for it, right? you know all we I don't necessarily know how the things are going to play out, but it helps me with some of my preparation around making sure got places and names and things like that ready to go when you guys do what you're going to do the next session. And I think, if you find yourself, if your comfort zone, you keep falling into railroading the party a little bit because you don't feel ready, just start asking them, hey, what do you think we'll be doing next session that'll help me prepare for it a little bit better, right? And
Yeah.
no party is going to go, oh, well, that's not very spontaneous, and I'm sure everybody will be like, oh, well, we've got these ideas and these ideas and these ideas, and okay,
Yeah.
good, I can get a few thoughts pulled together around those ideas, right?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And you've done it yourself a few times with some of the campaigns where we just get to that spot where you're like, I have no idea where you guys are headed or what you plan to do. I can't
It's a
prep all the things. So what should
Yeah,
I
it's
focus
a
on?
pretty wide open book right now, so I'm going to need a little bit of idea of where you might go from
It's like
here,
in
right?
the Adventures of Emathan, we're about to head out into the wilds. You're like, okay, that's a big area of unknown. Where specifically do you think you might be headed, or what are you interested in doing while you're out there?
Yeah, and I
That,
mean another thing you can do as a DM is throw out those plot hooks that can help you. I don't know exactly which plot hook you're going to grab onto and how you're going to interact with that plot hook, but it does reduce the amount of prep that I need to have ready to have a good session go, right? I think railroading for a lot of people just comes out of their fear that they're not going to know what to do next, right?
yeah,
And so I need you to do this thing and this thing and this thing because I was ready for those things, right?
yeah, definitely. So, kind of to recap something you had said at the very beginning. If you're a DM who likes running modules and you have a group who loves running modules, there's nothing wrong with that style of play.
Nope.
Don't let somebody else look at your game and say, "Oh, you just railroad the characters." If you're all having a great time, perfect. You are doing exactly what your table needs.
Yes.
If you're like our table, we love the whole open world. I want to do this. I want to try this concept. And that's what our table leans towards. So that's what you've had to learn to build and operate. And so your DMing style will shift and mold according to the table you're playing with, right? So, don't let anybody
Yeah.
tell you that any one way is better or different the other. If you're having fun at the end of the night, that's the goal.
Yeah, and the thing that DMs need to keep in mind is you're going to wander back and forth between sandbox where the players are making a lot of almost random choices to where they've made choices and now things are maybe a little more linear for a while because they decided that they want to go and collect this particular thing, and so they've got to go here to do this and here to do this in order to get to there. So maybe things get a little more linear, but then when you get past that particular part in your story, things wander back over into a very open, so kind of running back and forth between, the extremes, but never out on the extremes, I think is the
Yeah.
key for most
Yeah.
people, right?
And a little tip for DM, if you need players to get something done, make it time sensitive.
Yep.
By simply saying, "Oh, if this doesn't happen, so and so gets killed, or this thing happens that's terrible," you've now not railroaded, but you've given the motivation to your table to
Well,
get
and
something accomplished.
the word I like to use there is consequence to
Yes,
the choice
consequences.
to the choice that they've made, right? Because the world does not sit on pause and wait for the characters to get around to them. And if
Yeah,
if they were given a few hooks and waited to interact with them, I mean, as a DM, you should be saying, okay, well, here are the things that occurred because you took a month to get back to here when initially, we were hoping it would only be days,
yeah, exactly,
you know,
exactly.
and that then the next time maybe the characters will be a little more, we should see if this is time sensitive or not. Like, do we need to deal with this right away or
And as from a player side, sometimes it's exciting and it creates a level of almost anxiety that you got to get this done in a certain time. And so you're now not needlessly throwing in rests and, oh, we're going to take a long rest here because I want to have fresh spells. Well, you don't have time for that. So it adds a whole new element to the game, which is probably something we could talk on to another tavern talk. But, it's just a way to help, you know, get what you as a DM want accomplished because you're pushing a narrative without really, you know, boxing in your players and sending them down that railroad, which nobody wants to do. So,
yeah. So I think in the interest of trying to keep it around 30 minutes, we should wrap this up. So sort of to conclude here. So the problems with railroading and sandboxing occur when either style is used in extreme, right?
Yeah.
If you're on the extremes of sandboxing or the extremes of a linear storyline, which becomes railroading, the best campaigns run down the middle and are kind of willing to kind of weave back and forth between where you're sandbox or maybe you're a little more of a linear storyline, depending on where you are in your campaign. So the key as a DM is just to ensure that you're not limiting when um, parties do stuff and how they do stuff. So you may have a what they have to achieve, but you give them the most player agency you possibly can in achieving that what. You don't set up a very A to B to C to D, and that's the only way it can be done, right? That's when
Yeah.
things get a little unfun for the party. Any closing thoughts for you there?
No, I think you summed it up. Oh,
I don't know. I don't know if you could hear that. That's on my
wow.
end. Oops.
Yeah. So to kind of also sum it up, just remember as a DM, you have the what, leave it up to the players to create the how. That's in this cooperative storytelling that we do, your players are creating the how, you're just giving them the scenarios. And I think that's the best way to end this whole video.
Yeah, with the thunder and lightning and my poor dogs losing their minds out there, this is probably an excellent spot to wrap this up. So we'll call that a wrap for our second episode of Roll by Roll Tavern Talk. Um, Hopefully, everyone can join us again next time. Tavern Talks occurred the Thursday after each of our Adventures in Emathan sessions. And hopefully, Egan will be able to join us on the next one. Uh, as with our last Tavern Talk, unfortunately, due to our busy schedules, our next Adventures in Emathan session isn't until July 30th. So then, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but the next Thursday we'll record the next Tavern Talk. If you like what we're doing here, please make sure to like our videos and subscribe to the channels. And if you'd like to be notified whenever we do release another video, whether that's Adventures in Emathan or our Tavern Talks, just click that little bell and you'll get a notification when we put out a new video. So as we like to end the Tavern Talks with a cheers. So cheers to everyone, and we'll see you at the next Tavern Talk.
Where's that waitress? I'm empty here.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Bye now.